Over the last century or so, we have developed a particular view about celebrating Christmas. Vast majority of us think it is about spending time with family and friends. Yet, this safe domestic Christmas was a later invention. The Christmas stories as told in the Bible are far more unsettling. There is imperial oppression, and there are social divisions and economic exploitation in the nativity narratives. It is a story in which God Himself is born into a poor, vulnerable, and somewhat unorthodox family unit. Therefore, while Christmas for us is a time for family and generosity, it should also be a moment when we embrace the biblical message of justice and freedom for all. In a context of negativity around us, with the rhetoric of hatred and fear-mongering, the birth of this baby in a stable, made available through the generosity of strangers, calls us to choose a different way, to choose to see everyone as a neighbor, to choose to reach out across differences and build relationships and drive out mistrust and fear. The story of Christmas is about someone who does not fit easily into neat categories. Jesus Christ became, for a time, a refugee child. He and his family fled from Middle East Asia to North Africa because their lives were at risk. The plight of so many millions of displaced people in the world today must give us some cause for thought at this Christmas. We might want to make Christmas about comfortable traditions and surroundings, but Mary and Joseph did not know about that tradition. They were dislocated and far away from anything they knew when God came to them. And I hope that those of us who are feeling dislocated these days, whether because of situations in our personal life or from the general state of our world, will note that God became flesh in the midst of dislocation. When we are not comfortable, when we don't know where we are, God might appear in His own ways. Joseph and Mary were surely making their plans for the birth of their first child. And then, while they were busy making other plans, life happened. In this case, the emperor decided to do a census. Agreeing to follow God's plan or being a faithful person doesn't exempt you from the issues of this life. The census may be called, a virus may appear, wars may be declared, the economy may collapse, or cancer or another serious illness may show up. But in the midst of it all, God arrives. Outside of our plans and control, God shows up. Joseph and Mary arrived in Bethlehem at the end of what might have been a difficult journey, only to discover that there was no room for them in the inn. What was a discouraging news to Mary and Joseph is very good news for us. Because if God chose to be born to parents seeking shelter in someone's cattle shed, while they were on the road doing what was required of them by the emperor, then we should expect God to break into our lives, while we are also in the midst of the unplanned and unwanted moments. And God comes to us in a most ordinary manner and in a most ordinary place. That's the central message of what Christmas is all about. That this God, who is beyond anything we can imagine, is bound up with our everyday, ordinary lives. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said there was something about spending Christmas in prison, learning from his own experience of being in prison. He says Christmas means that God knows something about misery, suffering, poverty, loneliness, and helplessness. And God turned towards you when all others abandon you. We discover God in what we know, right here, in the midst of suffering and joy, in the midst of friends and family, neighbors and strangers, the birth of newborns and the loss of loved ones, endings and beginnings of new chapters in our lives, in healing and reconciliation, in war and peace, and the resilience of the human spirit, right here in the complexities of our lives. The birth of this baby explodes all our notions about God, whom we have dressed up in comic costumes over the centuries, as someone staying comfortably somewhere else. Christmas challenges us to be prepared to meet God in least expected places. And it tells us that our lives, however messy and disordered they are good enough places for God to be born. God chooses to be for us, to live among us, and to come crashing in the world just when we are least prepared. I pray that as you are in the midst of your lives, you will have hearts open to sense God's presence, that you will have ears to hear the good news in the midst of it all, and that God will surprise you with His presence at this Christmas. Amen.